The raging waters crashed against the mountainside, each thunderous impact sending tremors through the ancient rock. Sarah Mitchell clutched her soaked shawl tighter around her shoulders, her breath coming in terrified gasps as darkness enveloped the narrow cave entrance. Outside, the Blue Ridge Mountains vanished behind sheets of relentless rain. What had begun as a simple journey to deliver medicines to an ailing family across Hawkstone Ridge had transformed into a desperate fight for survival. As the last rays of daylight disappeared and the landslide sealed her fate, Sarah closed her eyes and whispered words her mother had taught her since childhood. Little did she know that through the howling storm, against all odds, someone was listening. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Ibile. Riverdale Valley flourished in the shadow of the Blue Ridge Mountains, a close-knit frontier settlement where life flowed with the rhythms of the wilderness surrounding it. The year was 1817, a time when the American frontier still held mysteries deeper than any map could capture. The mountains stood ancient and imposing, their peaks disappearing into mist on even the clearest days, creating a boundary between the known world and wilderness that few dared to explore fully. Thomas Mitchell had been among the first settlers to establish roots in Riverdale Valley 15 years earlier. His skilled hands had built not only the family's sturdy two-story home, but many of the settlement's most essential structures. His reputation as a master craftsman spread throughout the region, bringing steady work and respect to the Mitchell name. His wife, Mary, complemented his practical nature with a profound knowledge of healing herbs and remedies. While Thomas shaped wood into shelter, Mary shaped plants into salvation, easing the community's suffering through harsh winters and summer fevers alike. Their 3 children had grown within this delicate balance of civilization and wilderness. James, the eldest, at 26, had inherited his father's steady hands and practical mind. Emma, the youngest at 18, possessed her mother's intuitive understanding of plants and healing. And Sarah, at 22, had found her own path as the settlement schoolteacher, her gentle patience and quick intelligence making her beloved by the children of Riverdale Valley. Autumn had painted the mountains in brilliant hues of copper and gold, the cooling air carrying the scent of pine and earth. Sarah had always loved this time of year, when the forest seemed alive with color and movement. The Mitchell family gathered around their breakfast table that fateful morning, unaware that the day would forever alter their lives. Mary placed a steaming bowl of porridge before her husband, her brow furrowed with concern. "The Cooper's youngest hasn't improved," she said, her voice tinged with worry. "Martha sent word yesterday that little Elizabeth's fever hasn't broken despite the willow bark tea." Thomas nodded solemnly, his weathered hands curled around his cup. Joseph Bennett rode out to their homestead 2 days ago, but even his medicines haven't helped. Sarah looked up from helping Emma mend a torn apron. "What does she need, Mother? I could bring it to them today after my lessons conclude." Mary hesitated, glancing toward the window where dark clouds gathered on the horizon. "I've prepared a special tincture that might help, but those clouds concern me. The mountain trails can turn treacherous quickly when rain comes." James spoke up from where he was cleaning his hunting knife. "I'd go myself, but I promised Reverend Cooper I'd help repair the meeting house roof before the weather turns." "I'll be careful," Sarah assured them, her blue eyes reflecting determination that brooked no argument. "The Cooper homestead is only a few hours' journey, and Elizabeth needs help. I know those trails well." Mary reluctantly nodded, knowing her daughter's mind was made up. She disappeared into her workroom and returned with a small glass bottle filled with amber liquid, carefully wrapped in soft cloth. "Give this to Martha, 4 drops in tea 3 times daily. And Sarah," she added, pressing a small locket into her daughter's palm. "Take this. Your grandmother gave it to me for protection. Inside is a verse that has guided our family through many storms." Sarah tucked the locket around her neck, its weight familiar and comforting against her skin. She had seen her mother touch it in times of worry, like a talisman against unseen dangers. "I'll return before dark," she promised, embracing her mother tightly. The school lessons ended early that day as the distant rumble of thunder prompted parents to collect their children before the storm arrived. Sarah gathered her belongings quickly, securing Mary's medicine in her leather satchel and pulling her woolen shawl tightly around her shoulders. The path to the Cooper homestead would take her over Hawkstone Ridge, a journey she had made many times in fair weather. Though dark clouds now churned above the mountains, Sarah felt confident she could reach the isolated cabin before the worst of the storm arrived. The trail began gently enough, winding through stands of maple and oak, whose leaves danced and swirled in the strengthening wind. Sarah moved with purpose, her sturdy boots finding familiar footholds as the path gradually steepened. An hour into her journey, fat droplets of rain began to fall, pattering against the forest canopy. Sarah quickened her pace, pulling her shawl over her head for meager protection. As she climbed higher along Hawkstone Ridge, the gentle rain transformed into a downpour. The trail, normally firm beneath her feet, began to soften. Mud sucked at her boots, making each step more laborious than the last. Thunder boomed overhead, each crash seeming to shake the very mountain beneath her. Still, Sarah pressed forward, thinking of little Elizabeth's fever and the medicine that could bring relief. The path narrowed as it curved around a particularly steep section of the ridge. To her right, the mountainside fell away sharply, dropping hundreds of feet to the mist-shrouded valley below. To her left, sheer rock face rose toward the darkened sky. Sarah moved carefully, one hand against the wet stone for balance. A flash of lightning illuminated the trail ahead, followed instantly by a deafening crack of thunder that seemed to split the heavens. Then Sarah felt it, a tremor beneath her feet, subtle at first, then unmistakable. The sodden earth began to shift. Above her, loosened by days of earlier rain and now the pounding storm, rocks began to tumble down the mountainside. Sarah pressed herself against the cliff face as pebbles and then larger stones bounced past her, gaining speed as they disappeared into the mist below. A guttural roar filled the air as a section of the mountain above gave way. Sarah scrambled backward, her heart pounding in her chest. The landslide gathered momentum with terrifying speed, tearing trees from their roots and carrying boulders as if they weighed nothing. In those frantic moments, survival instinct took over. Sarah spotted a dark opening in the cliff face, a small cave, barely visible in the gloom. With the earth dissolving beneath her feet, Sarah lunged for the opening, throwing herself into the darkness as the world collapsed behind her. She landed hard on the stone floor, the breath knocked from her lungs. A deafening crash followed as tons of rock and earth thundered past the cave entrance, partially sealing it with debris. When the rumbling finally subsided, Sarah found herself in near total darkness. The cave entrance reduced to a gap barely wide enough to slip her hand through. For several minutes, Sarah remained motionless, her body trembling from shock and fear. When she finally managed to push herself to her knees, sharp pain lanced through her ankle. Gingerly, she explored the injury with her fingertips, wincing as she discovered swelling but no obvious break. Her hands moved to her satchel, finding it still secure across her body. The bottle containing Mary's medicine remained miraculously intact. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through the partially blocked entrance, Sarah surveyed her surroundings. The cave extended deeper into the mountain, its full dimensions lost in shadow. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling, forming small puddles on the uneven floor. The air felt cool and damp, carrying the mineral scent of wet stone. Sarah crawled toward the cave entrance, ignoring the pain in her ankle. Rain continued to fall in sheets outside, turning the freshly exposed earth to mud. She pushed against the rocks blocking her exit, but they refused to budge. Even if she could move them, the trail beyond had been obliterated by the landslide, leaving a treacherous slope of unstable debris in its place. The reality of her situation slowly dawned on her. No one knew exactly where she was. The Cooper family wasn't expecting her until she arrived. Her family wouldn't begin to worry until after dark. By then, the storm would make any search impossible until morning. Sarah was alone, injured and trapped. As darkness deepened both inside and outside the cave, the temperature dropped noticeably. Sarah shivered, drawing her damp shawl tighter. Around her shoulders, she probed deeper into the cave, hoping to find a drier spot to wait out the night. Using the rough wall as support, she limped further from the entrance, her free hand extended before her in the darkness. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The cave narrowed briefly before opening into a larger chamber. Here, the sound of dripping water echoed more prominently. As Sarah's eyes adjusted further, she discerned that the chamber split into two passages. From the left tunnel came the distinct sound of rushing water, perhaps an underground stream swollen by the rain. The right passage remained silent, extending into impenetrable darkness. Sarah chose the right passage, reasoning that it offered better shelter from the increasing dampness. She had taken only a few steps when her foot struck something that skittered across the stone floor with a hollow sound. Crouching carefully, she felt for the object and discovered a broken arrow shaft, its stone tip still sharp despite obvious age. Sarah swallowed hard, suddenly aware that she might not be the first person to seek shelter in these caves. Finding a relatively dry alcove against the chamber wall, Sarah eased herself down, extending her injured leg carefully before her. She opened her satchel, taking inventory of her meager resources. Besides Mary's medicine, she had a small knife, a tin cup, a handkerchief, and half a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth, her uneaten midday meal. The bread would sustain her for a day, perhaps two if she rationed carefully. Water, at least, would not be a concern with the stream nearby, assuming she could reach it safely. As full night descended outside, the cave plunged into complete darkness. The occasional flash of lightning briefly illuminated the entrance chamber, but none of its light reached Sarah's alcove. The thunder that followed each flash seemed more distant now, suggesting the storm might be moving away. Still, the rain continued unabated, its persistent patter a constant reminder of her isolation. Cold seeped from the stone into Sarah's bones. She huddled against the wall, drawing her knees to her chest for warmth. Sleep seemed impossible in such conditions, yet exhaustion tugged at her consciousness. As her fingers sought comfort in familiar gestures, they found the locket her mother had given her that morning. Sarah pried it open, though she couldn't see the verse inscribed inside. She didn't need to. Mary had recited it often enough that the words were etched in Sarah's memory. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me." Sarah closed her eyes, letting the familiar words settle around her like a blanket. In the darkness, with the mountain standing between her and home, prayer came naturally. Her whispered words echoed softly against the stone walls, keeping the pressing silence at bay. "Lord, guide their steps to find me. Keep Elizabeth's fever from worsening without her medicine. Protect my family from worry. And if it be your will, please send help before this cave becomes my grave." As Sarah's prayers faded into the darkness, she became aware of a new sound beneath the persistent dripping, a low rumble that seemed to come from deep within the mountain itself. The rumble grew stronger, and Sarah realized with dawning horror that the earth was moving again. Another landslide, perhaps triggered by the continuing rain, shook the cave around her. Dust and small stones showered from the ceiling as Sarah pressed herself against the wall, arms covering her head protectively. When the shaking subsided, a new sound reached her ears, the unmistakable rush of water, much closer than before. The stream in the left passage had changed course, or perhaps broken through some natural barrier. Sarah scrambled to her feet, ignoring the pain that shot through her ankle. Water was already seeping into the chamber, cold and insistent against her boots. Panic threatened to overwhelm her as Sarah realized her sanctuary was becoming a trap. If the water continued to rise, the cave could flood. She fumbled her way back toward the main chamber, seeking higher ground. The water level rose with alarming speed, already ankle-deep and climbing. Sarah splashed through the darkness, one hand trailing along the wall for guidance, the other clutching her satchel tightly. The main chamber offered little improvement. Water poured in from the left passage, transforming the once dry floor into a shallow, expanding pool. Sarah fought her way toward the partially blocked entrance, hoping the landslide debris might provide some elevation above the rising water. As she reached it, a flash of lightning illuminated the scene outside, a transformed landscape of mud and broken trees where the trail had once been. Sarah clambered onto the highest boulder she could find, its surface slick with spray. The water continued to rise steadily, now halfway to her knees. If it didn't slow soon, she would be forced to press herself into the narrow gap of the entrance, or risk drowning. Yet the entrance itself might become a deadly sluice if the water rose high enough to pour through it. The night stretched before her, each minute an eternity measured in the steady rise of water and the gradual fading of hope. Sarah clung to her perch, shivering violently as the cold water sapped her strength. She began to pray again, no longer asking for rescue, but for courage to face whatever came next. The locket pressed against her skin, its small weight a final connection to her family. Miles away, in a part of the forest few white settlers ever ventured, Keme moved silently through the rain-soaked underbrush. The Shawnee hunter had lived as a solitary figure on the fringes of his people for years, choosing the company of the mountains over the increasingly complicated relations with the encroaching settlers. His people had once roamed these mountains freely, but treaties and broken promises had pushed most Shawnee westward. Cam remained, feeling more kinship with the ancient peaks than with either world that fought to claim them. The storm had driven most game to shelter, making his hunt unproductive. As he prepared to return to his small cabin, hidden deep in the forest, a strange sensation stopped him, a feeling his grandmother would have called spirit touch. Something pulled at his awareness, drawing his attention toward Hawkstone Ridge, where no Shawnee would normally hunt due to its proximity to settler trails. Keme adjusted his course, moving through the forest with the fluid grace of one born to its rhythms. The rain had lessened to a gentle patter, though water still dripped heavily from the canopy above. As he neared the ridge, signs of destruction became evident. Broken saplings, fresh scars in the earth where rocks had tumbled down the mountainside, uprooted plants scattered like discarded toys. The hunter paused, reading the signs with practiced eyes. A landslide had transformed this section of the mountain, obliterating the settler trail that normally wound along the ridge. Keme would have continued on, leaving the settlers' paths to the settlers themselves, had not that persistent feeling pulled him forward. Something or someone called to him from the chaos of broken earth, following instinct refined by years. In the wilderness, Keme made his way carefully across the unstable slope. The faint sound of rushing water drew him toward a section of exposed cliff face. There, partially concealed by fallen debris, he discovered a narrow opening, a cave entrance, mostly sealed by the landslide. But what truly caught his attention was the flickering light visible through the gap, too steady to be lightning, too warm to be anything but human-made. Garrett Wilson and Samuel Reed had also witnessed the landslide, though from a different vantage point. The two trappers had established an illegal camp on Shawnee hunting grounds, their presence a deliberate provocation. Wilson nursed a particular hatred for the indigenous people who still claimed rights to land he coveted, while Reed simply followed his partner's lead, uncomfortable but unwilling to stand against him. The men had been checking their traps when the storm unleashed its fury on the mountain. Taking shelter beneath an overhanging rock, they watched as the earth gave way further up the ridge. Wilson spat a stream of tobacco juice into the mud. "That'll have taken out the main trail," he observed, without sympathy. "Any poor fool caught up there is meeting their maker tonight." Reed shifted uncomfortably. "Should we check? Might be someone needs help." Wilson's laugh was harsh. "In this weather? Let the dead bury the dead, Sam. We've got pelts to collect before this rain ruins them." As the rain eased, the men emerged from their shelter. Wilson led the way down a game trail that would take them to their hidden camp. Reed followed more slowly, his conscience troubled by their inaction. Neither man noticed the solitary Shawnee hunter moving purposefully across the ridge above them. Inside the cave, Sarah's situation had grown dire. The water had risen to mid-thigh level, forcing her to press against the cave ceiling. Her arms ached from maintaining her position, and hypothermia was becoming a real threat as her sodden clothes leached away vital body heat. Even prayer had become difficult, as her mind grew sluggish from cold and exhaustion. A sudden shaft of light cut through the darkness, momentarily blinding her. When her vision cleared, Sarah saw that some of the debris blocking the entrance had shifted, widening the opening slightly. Through the gap came the unmistakable glow of a torch, its light reflecting off the rising water in rippling patterns. Hope surged through Sarah's numbed body. "Help!" she called, her voice hoarse from hours of silence. "Please, I'm trapped." The torch paused, then moved closer. A face appeared in the widened gap, copper-skinned with dark, penetrating eyes that assessed the situation in an instant. Sarah had never seen the Shawnee hunter before, but in that moment, his presence seemed as natural as the mountain itself. Gem spoke in halting English. "Water rising. Need move stones quickly." Sarah nodded, understanding the urgency even through her fog of exhaustion. "Yes, please hurry." The hunter disappeared from view, and Sarah heard the sound of rocks being shifted and rolled aside. The entrance widened gradually, stones splashing into the rising water as Keem cleared a path. When the opening became large enough for a person to squeeze through, the hunter's arm extended into the cave, reaching for her. "Come, now." Sarah forced her stiffened limbs to move, wading through the chest-high water toward the entrance. Her injured ankle throbbed with each step, barely supporting her weight. When she reached the gap, Kem's strong hands grasped her arms, pulling her through the narrow opening with gentle but insistent force. The cool night air struck Sarah's face as she emerged, gasping from the flooded cave. Rain still fell, but gently now, the worst of the storm having passed. Kem supported her weight as her legs threatened to buckle beneath her. His torch, wedged securely between rocks nearby, cast long shadows across the destroyed landscape. "Thank you," Sarah managed, her teeth chattering uncontrollably. "I prayed for help." Keme nodded solemnly. "Heard you." Before Sarah could question this unexpected statement, the sound of voices reached them from further down the slope. Harsh, angry voices that made Keme tense beside her. Two figures emerged from the gloom, lanterns held high. Garrett Wilson's, face contorted with rage when he recognized the Shawnee hunter. "Well, well, the ghost of the mountains finally shows himself," Wilson growled, his hand moving to the pistol at his belt. "And with a settler girl, no less. What are you doing on my mountain, Injun?" Reed hung back, his expression caught between fear and shame. "Garrett, the girl looks hurt. We should—" "Shut up, Sam," Wilson snapped, not taking his eyes off Keem. "This savage has been stealing from our traps for months. Now I've caught him red-handed." Sarah felt Kem's arm tighten around her waist, supporting her more firmly. The hunter's face remained impassive, but she sensed the coiled tension in his body, ready to react if Wilson made a move. "He saved my life," Sarah said, finding strength in her gratitude. "I was trapped in that cave when the landslide hit. The water was rising. I would have drowned if he hadn't found me." Wilson's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "And what's a Mitchell girl doing out here alone during a storm? Your pa know where you are?" "I was taking medicine to the Cooper family," Sarah explained, one hand instinctively checking that her satchel was still secure. "Elizabeth is ill with fever." Reed stepped forward, ignoring Wilson's glare. "You're Thomas Mitchell's daughter? The school teacher?" Sarah nodded, recognizing the younger trapper from his occasional visits to Riverdale Valley. "We need to get you home," Reed said, his voice gentle. "Your family must be worried sick." Wilson wasn't so easily diverted. The Indian goes his own way. These mountains don't belong to his kind anymore. "These mountains belong to no man," Keem spoke, his deep voice startling in its clarity. "Mountain was here before you, before me. We'll be here after we are dust." A tense silence followed, broken only by the continuous patter of rain and the distant rumble of thunder. Sarah, still trembling from cold and exhaustion, found herself the unexpected mediator between ancient conflicts she barely understood. Her fingers found the locket at her throat, drawing strength from its familiar contours. "Mr. Wilson," she said, meeting the trapper's hard gaze directly, "I believe God sent this man to save me tonight. If you believe in divine providence, you cannot interfere with his freedom." Wilson's face darkened, but something in Sarah's steady gaze made him hesitate. Perhaps it was the authority she commanded as the settlement's teacher, or perhaps something deeper, a recognition of truth that transcended his prejudice. Whatever the reason, his hand slowly moved away from his pistol. "Fine," he muttered, "but if I catch him near our traps again—" "You won't," Kem stated simply. Reed stepped forward, offering his coat to Sarah. "Can you walk, Miss Mitchell? Your home is still miles from here and in your condition." Sarah tested her injured ankle, wincing as pain shot up her leg. "I'm not sure I can make it far," she admitted reluctantly. Keme spoke again, his words measured and deliberate. "I know path. Shorter way to valley, safer than broken trail." Wilson began to object, but Reed cut him off. "Let him help her. Garrett, look at her. She needs to get warm and dry before pneumonia sets in." After a moment's hesitation, Wilson gave a curt nod. "Fine, but we're coming too. I don't trust him alone with her." The unlikely party began their descent, Keemy supporting Sarah while the trappers followed close behind, lanterns lighting the treacherous path. The Shawnee hunter chose a route invisible to untrained eyes, a game trail that wound more gently down the mountainside, avoiding the worst of the landslide's destruction. As they walked, Sarah noticed the small medicine pouch that hung from Kem's neck, decorated with intricate beadwork and feathers. Following her gaze, the hunter touched it briefly. "Grandmother's medicine," he explained quietly. "Guides spirits, brings dreams." "My mother gave me this," Sarah replied, showing him her locket. "For protection. It contains a verse from our holy book." Kemi nodded, understanding the parallel. Different words, same faith. The journey down the mountain took 2 hours, each step a test of Sarah's endurance. Twice they paused for her to rest, during which Wilson maintained a suspicious distance while Reed anxiously checked her condition. Throughout it all, Kame remained a steady presence, his strength seemingly inexhaustible. As they approached the valley floor, lights became visible through the trees, lanterns moving in patterns that suggested a search party. Sarah's heart leaped with hope and relief. "They're looking for me," she whispered. Reed hurried ahead, calling out to alert the searchers. Soon figures emerged from the darkness, James Mitchell in the lead, followed by Thomas and several men from Riverdale Valley. The reunion was emotional, with Mary rushing forward to embrace her daughter while Thomas clasped her hand tightly, unable to speak through his relief. In the commotion, Keme stepped back, preparing to disappear into the forest as silently as he had emerged. Sarah noticed his withdrawal and broke from her family's embrace, limping toward him despite her exhaustion. "Wait!" she called, drawing the attention of all present. "This man saved my life tonight." The settlers regarded the Shawnee hunter with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. Thomas Mitchell stepped forward cautiously, studying the man who had rescued his daughter. "You found her in the cave?" he asked. Keme nodded once. "Heard prayers," he said simply. Mountains showed way. A murmur passed through the gathered settlers. Reverend Cooper, who had joined the search party despite the late hour, moved to stand beside Thomas. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," he said softly. "Sometimes he sends angels from unexpected places." Thomas extended his hand to the Shawnee hunter, a gesture rarely offered across the divide that separated their peoples. After a moment's hesitation, Keme accepted it, the two men's grip firm and genuine. "My family owes you a debt we can never repay," Thomas said. Keme shook his head slightly. "No debt. Mountain teaches us, all connected. Your daughter's prayers carried on wind. I only listened." From her mother's supportive embrace, Sarah watched this exchange with wonder. The medicine in her satchel would still reach Elizabeth Cooper, though delayed. Her own injuries would heal with time and rest. But something more significant had occurred on the mountain that night, a moment of understanding that transcended the boundaries drawn on maps and in men's minds. Before departing, Keme approached Sarah one final time. From his medicine pouch, he removed a small carved stone in the shape of a mountain peak, offering it to her with solemn ceremony. "For protection," he said, echoing her earlier words. "Mountain remembers those who respect its power." Sarah accepted the gift, its smooth surface warm against her palm. "Will I see you again?" she asked. Kame's expression remained impassive, but his eyes held a glimmer of something that might have been amusement. "Mountain is smaller than men think. Paths cross for those who walk with open eyes." With those cryptic words, the Shawnee hunter turned and disappeared into the forest, melting into the darkness as if he had never existed. Wilson and Reed remained behind, their story of the night's events already spreading among the settlers, growing and transforming with each retelling. In the days that followed, Sarah recovered slowly under her mother's care. Elizabeth Cooper's fever broke after receiving Mary's medicine, delivered by Thomas himself the morning after the rescue. The story of the landslide, the cave, and the Shawnee hunter's intervention became a favorite tale in Riverdale Valley, told and retold during long winter evenings. Sarah returned to her teaching, but something had changed within her. The carved stone remained in her pocket, a constant reminder of the night the mountain had taught her its most profound lesson, that beneath the divisions of language, culture, and history lay a shared humanity as enduring as the ancient peaks themselves. And sometimes, on clear days when sunlight bathed the Blue Ridge Mountains in golden light, Sarah would touch both the locket at her throat and the stone in her pocket, offering silent gratitude for prayers heard and answered through unexpected messengers. In the years that followed, stories persisted of a solitary Shawnee hunter who appeared in moments of greatest need, guiding lost children home or leading stranded travelers to safety. Some claimed he was a ghost, others a guardian spirit of the mountains. Sarah Mitchell knew only that faith could bridge divides deeper than any valley, and that sometimes the most profound answers to prayer came in forms no one could anticipate. The mountain remembered, And so did she. The journey back to Riverdale Valley stretched before them, each step more arduous than the last. Sarah leaned heavily against Kim's sturdy frame, her injured ankle throbbing with renewed intensity as the adrenaline of rescue began to fade. The rain had diminished to a gentle mist that clung to their skin and clothes, but the damage was done. Sarah's dress was soaked through, her body trembling with cold despite her best efforts to appear strong. Garrett Wilson stalked ahead, his lantern swinging with agitated movements that sent shadows dancing across the debris-strewn path. Samuel Reed lingered closer, his concerned gaze repeatedly finding Sarah, though he maintained a careful distance from the Shawnee hunter who supported her. "We should find shelter," Kemi said suddenly, his deep voice cutting through the silence that had enveloped the group. "Night still young, valley far. She needs warmth." Wilson turned sharply, suspicion etched into the hard lines of his face. "And I suppose you know of some convenient Shawnee camp nearby? Forget it, we keep moving." Sarah felt Kem tense beside her, but his expression remained impassive. Not Shawnee camp, hunter's cabin, used by many who travel these mountains. "Half-hour walk." Reed stepped forward, his voice tentative but determined. "Garrett, look at her. The girl's half frozen. If there's shelter nearby, we'd be fools not to use it." Wilson spat into the mud. "You gone soft on me, Sam? Next you'll be suggesting we invite the whole Shawnee Nation for supper." "Enough," Sarah managed through chattering teeth, summoning the authoritative tone she used with unruly students. "I may be injured, Mr. Wilson, but I'm not deaf. The cabin sounds like Providence to me, and I intend to accept God's provision." A tense silence followed, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder and the dripping of water from laden branches. Wilson's jaw worked as he considered his options, clearly unhappy, but unwilling to abandon a helpless settler woman, particularly Thomas Mitchell's daughter, whose father's influence extended throughout Riverdale Valley. "Fine," he growled finally, "but my rifle stays ready." Kemi gave a single nod, either accepting or dismissing the threat, and adjusted his course slightly. The small party moved deeper into the forest, away from the main path that would eventually lead to the valley. Sarah noticed how the Shawnee hunter chose his steps with deliberate care, avoiding treacherous patches of mud and fallen branches that might have further injured her ankle. True to Kem's word, after approximately half an hour of difficult travel, a small cabin emerged from the misty darkness. It was a humble structure, built of rough-hewn logs with a low stone chimney rising from its slanted roof. No light shone from its single window, but the building appeared solid and well-maintained. "Who owns this place?" Reed asked, curiosity overcoming his wariness. "No one." "Everyone," Keme replied. "Old hunting cabin. Trappers, hunters use when needed. Leave firewood for next person. Mountain law." Wilson snorted derisively at the phrase mountain law, but even he couldn't deny the appeal of a dry shelter, with the possibility of fire. He shouldered past Keme and Sarah, pushing open the cabin's wooden door with his rifle barrel. After a cautious inspection, he grudgingly stepped aside. "It's clear," he announced. "Sam, get a fire started." The interior of the cabin was simple but sufficient. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a rough wooden table and two benches positioned nearby. A narrow pallet covered with deerskin occupied the far corner. A few shelves held basic supplies, a cast-iron pot, several wooden cups, and what appeared to be a small cache of dried meat and beans stored in tightly sealed jars. Reed immediately set to work at the fireplace, where a neat stack of split logs waited beside a pile of kindling. His skilled hands soon coaxed a small flame to life, the warm glow gradually spreading to illuminate the cabin's shadowed corners. Sarah closed her eyes in momentary relief as the first wave of heat reached her chilled body. With unexpected gentleness, Kemi guided her to the bench closest to the growing fire. "Sit," he instructed. Clothes wet, need dry. Wilson positioned himself by the door, his rifle resting across his knees. His narrowed eyes tracked Kim's every movement with undisguised suspicion. Don't get too comfortable, Injun. First light, we're heading to Riverdale. Kim ignored him, instead reaching for one of the jars on the shelf. He opened it to reveal a collection of dried herbs and roots, unlike any Sarah had seen in her mother's workroom. Selecting several pieces, he placed them in a wooden cup before retrieving the iron pot. Need water, he said, moving toward the door. Wilson shifted to block his path. Oh no, you don't. You're not slipping away to bring back a war party. For the first time, a flash of annoyance crossed Keme's stoic features. If wanted you dead, would not need war party, he stated matter-of-factly. Need water for medicine, her ankle swelling. Reed looked up from tending the fire, his expression conflicted. Let him go, Garrett. Where's he gonna go in this weather? Besides, he's right. If he wanted to harm us, he'd have done it already. I'll go with him, Wilson decided, rising to his feet. Sam, you stay with the girl. Anything happens to her, it's on your head. With that ominous warning, he followed Kem into the rainy night, the door swinging shut behind them. In the sudden quiet of the cabin, Sarah became acutely aware of her condition. Her dress clung to her skin, cold and clammy, while her injured ankle pulsed with each heartbeat. The fire's warmth reached only her surface, unable to penetrate the bone-deep chill that had settled into her core. Reed worked in silence for several minutes, building the fire higher before finally turning to her with awkward concern. You should, try to dry your things, Miss Mitchell, he suggested, a flush rising to his weathered cheeks. I can. I'll step outside if you need to. Sarah managed a weak smile at his discomfort. Thank you, Mr. Reed, but I'll manage. Perhaps you could just turn your back for a moment. Reed nodded gratefully and positioned himself facing the cabin wall while Sarah removed her sodden outer dress. Beneath it, her petticoat was damp, but not soaked through. She spread the dress on the bench close to the fire, then wrapped herself in a deerskin she found folded near the pallet. It's safe to turn around now, she assured Reed, who visibly relaxed when he saw she was modestly covered. If you don't mind me asking, Miss Mitchell, Reed ventured after a moment, what were you doing on Hawkstone Ridge during a storm? Sarah explained about Elizabeth Cooper's fever and her mother's medicine, her hand instinctively moving to the satchel that still hung across her body. The storm came on more quickly than I anticipated, she concluded. I thought I could reach the Cooper homestead before the worst hit. Reed nodded thoughtfully. Brave of you. Most folks wouldn't have attempted that journey even in fair weather. It wasn't bravery, Sarah corrected gently. It was necessity. Little Elizabeth needed help. Before Reed could respond, the cabin door swung open as Keem and Wilson returned. The Shawnee hunter carried the iron pot, now filled with water, which he placed directly into the fire. Wilson resumed his position by the door, though Sarah noticed a slight easing of the tension in his posture. Kame moved with practiced efficiency, adding the herbs from the wooden cup to the heating water. A pungent, earthy aroma soon filled the cabin, not unpleasant but distinctly unfamiliar to Sarah's senses. What is that? She asked, curiosity temporarily overriding her discomfort. Medicine, Keme replied simply. Willow bark for pain, yarrow for swelling, others to strengthen blood. Wilson snorted. Indian mumbo-jumbo, probably poison. Sarah fixed him with a steady gaze. My mother is a healer, Mr. Wilson. She also uses willow bark for pain. Knowledge of the Earth's medicines isn't exclusive to any one people. This simple observation silenced Wilson temporarily, though his suspicious expression remained unchanged. Kem continued his preparation, seemingly oblivious to the trapper's hostility. When the water had boiled for several minutes, he removed the pot from the fire using a folded piece of leather and set it aside to cool slightly. "First for drinking," he explained, pouring some of the liquid into a wooden cup. "Then for ankle." Sarah accepted the cup, inhaling the steam that rose from the dark liquid. The aroma was stronger now, reminiscent of the forest after rain. She took a cautious sip and was surprised to find the taste less bitter than expected, with notes of sweetness beneath the medicinal tang. "Thank you," she said, meeting Kem's dark eyes with genuine gratitude. The Shawnee hunter acknowledged her thanks with a slight inclination of his head. He then tore a strip of cloth from his own shirt and dipped it into the remaining liquid before kneeling before Sarah. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward her injured ankle. Sarah nodded, extending her foot cautiously. Wilson stirred, his hand tightening on his rifle, but he made no comment as Kim gently wrapped the soaked cloth around Sarah's swollen ankle. The initial contact sent a jolt of pain through her leg, but it was quickly followed by a soothing warmth that seemed to penetrate deep into the injured tissue. "Rest now," Kim advised, rising to his feet. "Medicine work while you sleep." Exhaustion crashed over Sarah like a physical weight. The events of the day, her terrifying hours trapped in the flooding cave, the dramatic rescue, the painful journey through the forest, all coalesced into an overwhelming fatigue that she could no longer resist. The last thing she remembered before sleep claimed her was the steady crackle of the fire and the unexpected sense of safety despite the strange circumstances. Sarah awoke to the sound of low voices in conversation. Daylight filtered through the cabin's small window, suggesting that several hours had passed. She remained still, eyes closed, as fragments of dialogue reached her. "Seen you before, watching our trap lines," Wilson was saying, his voice quieter but no less hostile than it had been the previous night. "Watch many things in forest," came Keme's measured response. "Learn much from watching." "Those mountains belong to my father and his father before him," Wilson insisted. "We've got rights to them." A pause, then. "Mountain was here before your father's father was born. Will be here after your son's son is dust. How can man own what outlives all men?" The philosophical question went unanswered as Reed joined the conversation. "The girl's family will be worried sick. We should head to Riverdale at first light." "Already past first light," Kem observed. "Storm gone. Path clear now." Sarah chose this moment to open her eyes, drawing the attention of all three men. She pushed herself to a sitting position, noticing immediately that the throbbing in her ankle had subsided to a dull ache. The deerskin covering had kept her warm through the night, and her dress, spread near the fire, appeared mostly dry. "How long have I slept?" she asked, her voice still rough from sleep. Reed answered first. "All night, Miss Mitchell. It's just past dawn now." Sarah's thoughts immediately went to her family. "They'll be searching for me. My father and brother will have organized a party when I didn't return last night." "Then we'd best get you back to them," Wilson declared, rising to his feet. "Get yourself decent and we'll head out." With as much dignity as she could muster, Sarah retrieved her dress and, with her back turned to the men, slipped it on over her petticoat. The fabric was still slightly damp in places, but would serve well enough for the journey home. She tested her weight on her injured ankle, pleased to discover that while tender, it would support her with minimal pain. "Your medicine worked," she acknowledged to Kem, who watched her experimental steps with a critical eye. "We'll hold for journey," he confirmed, "but need rest after." The small party prepared to depart, gathering the few supplies they had used during their overnight stay. True to the mountain law Kemi had described, Reed added fresh logs to the woodpile beside the fireplace, while Wilson grudgingly replenished the water bucket from a nearby stream. Sarah noticed that Kemi left several strips of dried meat on the table, payment, she assumed, for the herbs he had used. Outside, the forest had transformed overnight. What had been a treacherous, storm-lashed wilderness was now a glistening paradise, sunlight refracting through countless water droplets that clung to every leaf and branch. The air smelled clean and new, carrying the mingled scents of pine, wet earth, and flowering undergrowth. "Beautiful," Sarah murmured momentarily, forgetting her circumstances as she took in the breathtaking scene. "Yes," Kemi agreed simply, his gaze sweeping the forest with deep appreciation. "Mountain shows many faces, beauty after storm, always." Wilson interrupted the moment. "Save the poetry, Injun. Which way to Riverdale? The usual trail's been wiped." "Out by the landslide." Kemi pointed toward a game trail, barely visible amidst the underbrush. "This way faster. Avoid where earth still unstable." The path Kemi chose descended gradually through the forest, skirting the worst of the previous night's destruction. Though narrower than the main settler trail, it was surprisingly navigable, winding through stands of ancient oak and hickory whose massive trunks had weathered countless storms. Occasionally, Sarah noticed subtle markers on trees, a bent branch. Here, a particular arrangement of stones there, that seemed to guide Kem's decisions at forks in the path. Despite the Shawnee hunter's medicine, Sarah's ankle began to protest after an hour of steady walking. She tried to hide her discomfort, but Kem's observant eyes missed nothing. "Need rest," he stated, not a question, but a fact. "I'm fine," Sarah insisted, though the perspiration on her brow betrayed her pain. "Pushing too hard makes injury worse," Kem said with quiet authority. "Short rest now means stronger steps later." Wilson looked ready to object, but Reed spoke first. "He's right, Garrett. We won't make good time if she collapses on us." He gestured to a fallen log beside the trail. "Just 10 minutes. Reluctantly, Wilson agreed. Sarah sank gratefully onto the log, extending her throbbing ankle with a barely suppressed sigh of relief. Keme knelt beside her, examining the swelling that had returned despite his treatment. "Need another poultice," he decided, rising to his feet. "We'll find proper plants." Wilson tensed. "Oh no, you're not wandering off again." "Then come," Kemi invited with a gesture that might have contained a hint of challenge. "Watch what you wish." The two men disappeared into the underbrush, leaving Sarah alone with Reed, who shuffled awkwardly before settling on the far end of the log. A comfortable silence settled between them, broken eventually by Reed's hesitant voice. "Miss Mitchell, I feel I should apologize." Sarah turned to him, surprised. "For what, Mr. Reed?" The trapper's weather-worn face creased with genuine remorse. "For Garrett's behavior. For my own, too, I suppose. We shouldn't have been up on that ridge in the first place. Those hunting grounds are protected by treaty, but Garrett doesn't much care for such agreements." "No, you're trespassing?" Sarah asked, pieces falling into place. Reed nodded uncomfortably. "The best beaver streams run through Shawnee territory. Garrett figures what they don't know won't hurt them." He studied his calloused hands. "It's not right, but a man needs to eat." "There are other ways to make a living," Sarah observed gently. "Honest ways." "Perhaps," Reed conceded, "but not many that allow a man to live free, answering to no one but himself and the wilderness." A wistful expression crossed his face, "or at least, that's what I tell myself to sleep at night." Before Sarah could respond, Keme and Wilson returned. The Shawnee hunter carried several plants with small white flowers and feathery leaves, which he crushed between his fingers before applying the paste directly to Sarah's ankle. The immediate cooling sensation brought blessed relief. "We should encounter search party soon," Kemi announced as he finished his ministrations. "They will have come up main trail from valley." As if summoned by his words, distant voices reached them. Multiple men calling Sarah's name, their tones tinged with increasing desperation. Sarah's heart leaped. "Here, she called, her voice stronger than she expected. "I'm here!" The voices changed direction, growing louder as the search party homed in on her call. Reed helped Sarah to her feet, supporting her as they moved toward the main trail, where they would be more visible. Keme hung back, his expression unreadable as he watched Wilson stride ahead to meet the approaching settlers. Within minutes, a group of men pushed through the underbrush, their faces transforming from grim determination to joyous relief at the sight of Sarah. James Mitchell led them, his normally composed features slack with emotion as he rushed forward to embrace his sister. "Sarah," he breathed, crushing her against his chest. "We thought, when we found the landslide, the trail was completely gone." "I'm all right, James," she assured him, tears welling despite her best efforts. "Truly." Thomas Mitchell appeared behind his son, his steady stride belying the storm of emotion evident in his eyes. Without a word, he gathered both his children in his arms, his breath coming in ragged gasps that spoke more eloquently than words. When he finally released them, Thomas turned to address Wilson, who had been explaining the rescue with considerable embellishment and strategic omissions. "You found her in a cave?" he asked, his tone making it clear he sensed something missing from the account. Wilson nodded, puffing out his chest slightly. "Heard her calling out. Dangerous work. Getting to her through that floodwater, but we managed." Reed shifted uncomfortably at this revision of events, but remained silent. Sarah, however, could not allow such falsehood to stand. "Mr. Wilson is being modest," she interrupted firmly. "He and Mr. Reed offered valuable assistance, but it was this man who actually found me and pulled me from the cave." She turned, gesturing toward where Keme had been standing, only to discover that the Shawnee hunter had vanished as silently as morning mist. Wilson seized the opportunity. "Ah, yes, there was an Indian involved, happened to be nearby, made himself useful. Disappeared into the trees just now, skittish, those Shawnee." Thomas Mitchell's shrewd gaze suggested he suspected there was more to the story, but with his daughter safely recovered, details could wait. "Whoever helped, they have my gratitude," he stated. "Now let's get you home, Sarah. Your mother has been beside herself with worry." The journey back to Riverdale Valley passed in a blur for Sarah. Riding double with James, she allowed exhaustion to overtake her once more, secure in the knowledge that she was finally safe among her family. The settlement came into view by mid-morning, its familiar buildings and smoke-trailing chimneys never looking so welcoming. Mary Mitchell burst from their home at the first sound of the returning search party, her normally composed features transformed by frantic worry. When she saw Sarah alive and whole despite her injuries, she let out a sob that seemed to release hours of accumulated fear. "My child," she whispered, gathering Sarah into a fierce embrace. "My beloved child." The following days brought gradual healing and endless retellings of Sarah's ordeal. The story of the landslide, the flooding cave, and the miraculous rescue spread throughout Riverdale Valley, gaining embellishments with each iteration. Wilson and Reed enjoyed brief celebrity status, though Sarah noticed that Reed seemed increasingly uncomfortable with the admiration, particularly when the tale was told in her presence. Mary tended to Sarah's injured ankle with her customary skill, though she examined Kem's herbal poultice with professional curiosity. "Yarrow and willow bark, yes," she murmured, identifying the familiar elements. "But these others, I don't recognize them. The swelling has reduced remarkably quickly." A week after her rescue, Sarah sat on the Mitchells' front porch, her bandaged ankle propped on a small stool as she enjoyed the afternoon sunshine. The door opened behind her as Emma emerged with 2 steaming cups of tea. "Thought you might like some company," her younger sister offered, settling beside her on the bench. "You've been awfully quiet these past days." Sarah accepted the tea gratefully. Just thinking, she admitted, about what happened on the mountain. You mean about the Shawnee hunter? Emma asked perceptively. Despite being younger, she had always possessed an uncanny ability to read Sarah's thoughts. Yes, Sarah acknowledged. He saved my life, Emma. Without him, I would have drowned in that cave. Yet, he disappeared without accepting thanks. And now Wilson and Reed are being celebrated as heroes. Emma sipped her tea thoughtfully. Perhaps he didn't want recognition. Father says the Shawnee prefer to avoid settler attention these days. With good reason, Sarah murmured, remembering Wilson's immediate hostility. But it doesn't seem right that no one knows the truth. You know, Emma pointed out, and Mother and Father believe you, even if they don't correct the public story. Sometimes the truth matters most to those directly involved. Sarah considered this wisdom, so mature coming from her younger sister. There's something else, she confessed. When I was trapped in that cave, certain I was going to die, I prayed. Not just formal prayers, but desperate pleas from my heart. And Keme said he heard my prayers, that the mountain showed him the way. Emma's eyes widened slightly. Do you think he meant literally that he actually heard your voice? Impossible. The cave was too remote, the storm too loud, Sarah reasoned. But there was something in the way he said it. As if he had sensed my need somehow. She touched the locket that still hung around her neck. As if faith can call across distances in ways we don't understand. The sisters sat in contemplative silence, watching as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. The mountains stood silhouetted against the golden light, their ancient peaks unchanged by the human dramas that unfolded beneath them. I want to find him, Sarah decided. Suddenly, to thank him properly and to return this. She reached into her pocket and withdrew the small stone carving Keme had pressed into her hand before disappearing, a perfectly rendered hawk taking flight. Emma eyed the carving with admiration. It's beautiful, but how will you find him? The mountains are vast, and the Shawnee keep to themselves. I don't know, Sarah admitted, but I feel I must try. Before Emma could respond, a figure appeared at the edge of the Mitchells' property, Reverend Cooper walking with purpose toward their porch. The sisters exchanged curious glances as they waited for him to reach them. Good afternoon, Sarah, Emma, he greeted them, removing his hat respectfully. I hope I find you recovering well, Sarah. Much improved, thank you, Sarah confirmed, though Mother insists I stay off my feet for another week at least. Wise advice, the Reverend nodded. And your expedition to deliver medicine to Elizabeth was successful in the end, even if delayed. She's much recovered now. He hesitated, seeming to choose his next words carefully. I've come on a somewhat unusual matter. May I sit? Emma immediately made room on the bench. The Reverend settled himself, his expression thoughtful as he gazed toward the mountains that had nearly claimed Sarah's life. I had a visitor yesterday, he finally said. Not at the meeting house, but at my home, a Shawnee man. Sarah's heart quickened. Keme? Reverend Cooper raised an eyebrow. He didn't give his name to me, but he asked about you, wanted to know if you had recovered from your ordeal. What did you tell him? Sarah asked eagerly. The truth, that you were healing well, thanks. To God's mercy and your family's care. The Reverend paused. He seemed relieved, said nothing more, but left this for you. From his pocket he withdrew a small deerskin pouch. Sarah accepted it with trembling fingers. Inside she found several bundles of dried herbs, each wrapped in a different leaf and tied with plant fibers. Their fragrances mingled, some familiar from her mother's workroom, others completely foreign to her experience. Medicine, she realized aloud. For my ankle. Reverend Cooper nodded. So I assumed. He was very specific that it should come directly to you. He studied Sarah with gentle curiosity. There seems to be more to your rescue than Wilson's dramatic tale suggests. Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Yes, Reverend, much more." "I thought as much," he said, rising to his feet. "God's instruments sometimes come in unexpected forms, Sarah. Our Lord works through all his creation when necessary." As the Reverend took his leave, Emma leaned forward to examine the herbs more closely. "Mother will want to see these," she said with professional interest. "Some I don't recognize at all." "Bin," but Sarah's attention had shifted to something else in the pouch. A small piece of birch bark with markings scratched into its surface. It took her a moment to realize they formed a simple map showing the river, the settlement, and a particular bend in the Clearwater where it curved around a distinctive rock formation. An X marked a spot just beyond this formation, with the phase of the moon clearly indicated above it. "He wants to meet," Sarah breathed, understanding dawning. 3 nights from now, at the full moon. Emma's eyes widened. "Sarah, you can't possibly go alone to meet a strange man in the forest at night, even if he did save your life." "I won't go alone," Sarah assured her, though her mind was already formulating a plan. "I'll ask James to accompany me. He deserves the chance to thank my rescuer as much as I do." The days until the full moon passed with agonizing slowness for Sarah. Her ankle improved steadily with the application of Keem's herbs, which Mary studied with increasing professional respect. "These combinations are ingenious," she admitted after experimenting with small batches. "The proportions particularly. I would have used far more willow bark, but this balance seems to work better." When the appointed night arrived, Sarah approached James after the evening meal. In hushed tones, she explained about the map and her desire to meet Keem properly. James listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful. "You're certain this isn't some trap?" he asked when she had finished. "Wilson has been spreading some wild tales about this Shawnee hunter. Says he's been stealing from their trap lines for months." "Wilson is a liar," Sarah stated firmly. "He tried to take credit for my rescue when Keme did all the work. Besides, if Keme wished me harm, he could have simply left me to drown in that cave." Keme withdrew a small leather bundle from within his clothing and held it out to James. The moonlight caught on something metallic as he unwrapped it, revealing a tarnished silver pocket watch with an intricate pattern of oak leaves etched into its case. "Wilson dropped this near Trapline," Keem explained. 2 days ago, found it after he and Reed left." James took the watch, turning it over in his palm. His brow furrowed as he examined the distinctive engravings. "This belonged to Jacob Mercer," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "He was found dead near his traps last winter. Everyone assumed he'd fallen and hit his head during a storm." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. "You're saying Wilson." "Not saying," Keem corrected. "Carefully. Only showing what Mountain revealed. Watch tells its own story. The implications hung in the night air like a physical presence. If Wilson had Jacob Mercer's watch, a family heirloom the old trapper would never have willingly parted with, it raised disturbing questions about Mercer's supposedly accidental death. James closed his fingers around the watch, his expression hardening with resolve. "This needs to go to Father and the Settlement Council immediately. If Wilson killed Mercer..." "Be careful," Kem warned. "Wolf that tastes human blood becomes more dangerous when cornered." Sarah nodded, understanding the wisdom in his caution. "James, we should tell Father privately first. Let him decide how to approach the council." Her brother agreed, tucking the watch securely into his pocket. "Thank you," he said to Keem, genuine respect evident in his voice. "Not just for saving my sister, but for bringing this to light. Jacob Mercer was a good man." Keem acknowledged the thanks with a slight inclination of his head. His gaze lingered on Sarah, something unspoken passing between them, a connection forged in the crucible of survival and deepened by their shared understanding of forces beyond ordinary perception. "We should return home before we're missed," James said, glancing at the position of the moon overhead. Sarah nodded but hesitated, reluctant to leave. "Will we see you again?" she asked Keme. The Shawnee hunter's expression remained impassive, but his eyes held a warmth that had not been there during their first encounter. "Mountain has many paths," he said enigmatically. "Some meant to cross again." With those words, he stepped backward into the shadows of the forest. One moment he was there, solid and real in the moonlight. The next, he had vanished so completely, it seemed he might have been a dream. The siblings made their way back to Riverdale Valley, in thoughtful silence, each processing the implications of what they had learned. The watch in James's pocket felt unnaturally heavy, weighted with accusations that would forever change their community once spoken aloud. Thomas Mitchell was still awake when they returned, sitting by the dying embers of the hearth fire with an open Bible on his lap. His eyebrows rose in silent question as his children entered, their expressions betraying the gravity of their midnight excursion. "We need to speak with you, Father," James said without preamble, "about Jacob Mercer's death." Dawn was breaking over Riverdale Valley by the time Thomas Mitchell absorbed the full account of Sarah's rescue, her clandestine meeting with Keem, and the damning evidence of Jacob Mercer's watch. His weathered face had grown increasingly grave as the story unfolded, his fingers tracing the familiar engravings on the tarnished silver case. "I always found it strange," he finally said, "that Jacob would have been so careless. He knew those mountains better than anyone in the settlement, save perhaps for Joseph Bennett." He closed the watch with a decisive snap. "This changes everything." "What will you do?" Sarah asked, fighting exhaustion after the long night. Thomas's expression was resolute. "First, I'll speak with Joseph. He was Jacob's closest friend and a member of the council. Together, we'll determine how to proceed without causing panic in the settlement." "Wilson has been gathering supporters," James reminded him. "Men who listen to his talk of Shawnee, threats and territorial rights. If he gets wind that we're investigating him, then we must move carefully but decisively," Thomas concluded. "Sarah, you should rest. Your mother will be suspicious enough if she finds you exhausted this morning." Sarah wanted to protest, to insist on being part of whatever action would follow, but the throbbing in her ankle reminded her of her limitations. Reluctantly, she retreated to her room, though sleep proved elusive despite her fatigue. Her mind kept returning to Keem's words about the mountain's paths and his warning about cornered wolves. Outside her window, Riverdale Valley awakened to what appeared to be an ordinary day. Smoke rose from chimneys as breakfast fires were kindled. Children's voices carried on the morning air as they completed chores before school. The rhythm of the settlement continued, unaware that forces were in motion that would soon disrupt its peaceful cadence. Sarah must have eventually drifted into sleep, for she awakened with a start to find Emma shaking her shoulder gently. The sun had risen well above the horizon, indicating she had slept several hours. "Father asked me to wake you," Emma said, concern evident in her expression. "There's a council meeting being called. He says you need to attend." Fully alert now, Sarah sat up. "Did he speak with Dr. Bennett?" Emma nodded. "Early this morning, Dr. Bennett went straight to Reverend Cooper, and they've been closeted with Father for hours." She hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "There are rumors about Wilson. Someone said he and Reed had a violent argument." At dawn, Reed rode out of the settlement afterward, heading west. Sarah absorbed this information as she dressed hurriedly, her thoughts racing. If Reed had fled, it suggested the partnership between the trappers had fractured, perhaps over the revelations about to come to light. The Mitchell family made their way to the meeting house where settlement council gatherings were held. Already, A crowd had gathered outside the simple wooden structure, speculation buzzing through the assembled settlers like bees in a disturbed hive. Inside, the council members had arranged themselves at a long table at the front of the room. Thomas Mitchell sat among them, his expression grave but composed. Dr. Joseph Bennett occupied the chair beside him, looking older than his years, grief etched into the lines of his face. Reverend Cooper stood slightly apart, his role that of spiritual advisor rather than voting member. As the remaining settlers filed in, filling the benches to capacity, Sarah noticed Garrett Wilson standing near the back wall. His posture was deceptively relaxed, but she observed the tension in his jaw, the calculating coldness in his eyes as they swept the room. When his gaze landed on Sarah, a flash of hatred so pure it was almost tangible passed across his features. Reverend Cooper called the gathering to order with a brief prayer, then yielded the floor to Thomas Mitchell. Sarah's father rose slowly, the weight of his responsibility evident in every movement. "Friends and neighbors," he began, his deep voice carrying easily to the farthest corners of the room. "We are gathered today on a most serious matter concerning the death of our friend and fellow settler, Jacob Mercer." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Jacob had been well liked, his supposed accident mourned throughout the settlement. Thomas continued steadily. "New evidence has come to light suggesting that Jacob's death was not an accident, as we believed, but the result of deliberate action." The murmur became a wave of shocked exclamations. At the back of the room, Wilson's posture shifted subtly, his hand moving to rest near his belt where Sarah knew he carried a hunting knife. Thomas held up Jacob's silver watch, its surface catching the light streaming through the meeting house windows. This watch, as many of you know, was a Mercer family heirloom. Jacob was never without it. When his body was found, the watch was missing, leading us to believe it had been lost in his fall or perhaps washed away by the stream where he was discovered. Dr. Bennett rose to stand beside Thomas. "I examined Jacob's body," he added, his medical authority lending weight to the proceedings. "At the time, I attributed his head wound to a fall against the rocks, but I also noted unusual bruising on his arms and throat that troubled me, marks consistent with a struggle rather than an accident." Sarah watched as understanding dawned on the faces around her. The settlement had experienced little violence in its 15-year history. Murder was almost unthinkable within their close-knit community. "How was the watch recovered?" called out Michael Foster, a farmer whose land adjoined the Mitchell property. Thomas exchanged a brief glance with Sarah before answering. "It was found near one of the trap lines on Shawnee hunting grounds and brought to our attention." "By who?" demanded a voice from the back. Wilson, his tone challenging. "Some Shawnee who claims he just happened upon it." "The source is reliable," Thomas replied evenly, "and the watch speaks for itself. It is undeniably Jacob's, and it was found among your possessions, Garrett Wilson." All eyes turned to Wilson, whose face had drained of color despite his defiant stance. "That's a lie," he spat. "Someone's planting evidence to turn you all against me. Probably those Shawnee you're so eager to believe over your own kind." "No one has accused you directly," Reverend Cooper interjected, his calm voice cutting through the rising tension. "But the council believes these circumstances warrant investigation. We're simply seeking the truth of what happened to one of our own." Wilson's laugh was harsh and humorless. "Investigation? You've already decided I'm guilty, all because of some story cooked up by Mitchell's daughter and her savage friend." Sarah felt her mother's hand tighten around hers, but she kept her gaze steady, refusing to be intimidated by Wilson's obvious attempt to discredit her. "My daughter nearly died during the landslide," Thomas stated, an edge entering his voice for the first time. "Her account of what followed, including her rescue, has been consistent and verified by multiple sources. If you have evidence to offer in your defense, the council will hear it." Wilson's eyes darted around the room, assessing his support among the assembled settlers. Whatever he saw there must have disappointed him, for his expression hardened into something dangerous. "I don't answer to this council," he declared. "You've overstepped your authority. This settlement exists because men like me cleared the way, dealing with the Indian threat while you built your comfortable homes and pretended to be civilized. The only threat here comes from men who disregard law and treaty," Dr. Bennett replied. "Jacob was my friend for 20 years. He respected the boundaries with the Shawnee." "Did that respect cost him his life, Wilson?" A tense silence followed the direct accusation. Wilson's hand now openly gripped his knife handle, his knuckles white with pressure. Several of the men on the council shifted, ready to intervene if violence erupted. Before the situation could escalate further, the meeting house door swung open. Samuel Reed stepped inside, his clothes dusty from hard riding, his expression haunted but determined. "I'll speak to what happened to Jacob Mercer," he announced, his voice carrying clearly despite its subdued tone. Wilson's face contorted with rage. "You treacherous—" "Enough, Garrett," Reed cut him off. "I've carried this too long already." He moved toward the council table, deliberately placing himself between Wilson and the assembled settlers. "I was there that day. I saw everything." The room fell completely silent as Reed gathered himself visibly, like a man about to shoulder an immense burden. "Jacob confronted us about trapping on Shawnee lands," he began, his voice strengthening. "With each word, said he'd report us to the council if we didn't pull our lines back to where they belonged. There was an argument. It got heated." Reed swallowed hard, his gaze fixed on the floor, as if he couldn't bear to meet the eyes of his neighbors. "Garrett hit him. Just meant to shut him up," he said afterward. "But Jacob fell badly, struck his head on a rock. When we saw the blood..." He faltered momentarily before continuing. "Garrett said no one would believe it was an accident, not with our history of trespassing on Shawnee hunting grounds. Said we needed to make it look like Jacob had fallen on his own." "You're a dead man, Sam," Wilson growled, drawing his knife now without pretense. Several men moved at once, Thomas and Dr. Bennett from the council table, James from his place beside Sarah, and Michael Foster from the crowd. They converged on Wilson before he could reach Reed, disarming him after a brief but violent struggle that left Foster with a shallow cut across his forearm. As Wilson was restrained, his wild gaze found Sarah. "This is because of you," he snarled. "You and that Shawnee devil should have left you to drown in that cave." "Take him to the storeroom and secure him there," Thomas directed the men holding Wilson. "We'll convene a proper trial once we've collected all testimony." As Wilson was dragged from the meeting house, still hurling threats and accusations, the atmosphere shifted palpably. Relief mingled with shock as the settlers tried to process what they had witnessed. Sarah felt a complex mixture of emotions: vindication, that Wilson's true nature had been exposed, sorrow for Jacob Mercer's fate, and concern for what might follow in the disrupted peace of their community. Reverend Cooper called for a moment of prayer, his steady voice providing an anchor amid the turbulent currents of reaction swirling through the room. Sarah bowed her head along with the others, but found her thoughts drifting to Kime and the mysterious ways their paths had crossed. Without his intervention, both in saving her life and in bringing Jacob's watch to light, Wilson might have continued his destructive course unchecked. The following days brought a formal trial for Garrett Wilson, with Reed's testimony providing the cornerstone of evidence against him. The Settlement Council, acting as judges in the absence of formal courts on the frontier, found Wilson guilty of Jacob Mercer's death. His punishment was severe but not unexpected. banishment from Riverdale Valley and all settlements within 50 miles, with notice to be sent to other frontier communities about his crimes. As for Reed, his willing testimony and obvious remorse earned him a measure of leniency. He would remain under the supervision of Reverend Cooper for 1 year, contributing labor to community projects as restitution for his role in concealing Mercer's death. Whether he would eventually be accepted back into the settlement's trust remained to be seen, but the path to redemption had at least been laid open before him. Sarah found herself at the center of attention throughout these proceedings. Her ordeal in the cave and remarkable rescue now inextricably linked to the exposure of Jacob Mercer's killer. Some regarded her with newfound respect, while others questioned the propriety of her continued interest in the Shawnee hunter who had saved her life. "Pay them no mind," Mary counseled her daughter as they worked together in the kitchen garden, harvesting late summer vegetables. "People fear what they don't understand. Your father and I know the truth of what happened." Sarah nodded, though the whispers still stung. "I just wish they could see Kem as I do, not as some mysterious savage, but as a man of wisdom and kindness who happened to be in the right place at exactly the right moment." Mary straightened, brushing soil from her hands as she regarded her daughter thoughtfully. "Perhaps that's your calling, Sarah, to help build understanding between our peoples. You've always had a gift for teaching. Maybe that gift extends beyond the schoolroom." The idea took root in Sarah's mind, growing stronger in the weeks that followed. When she resumed her teaching duties at the settlement school, she began incorporating stories that reflected the dignity and wisdom of indigenous cultures, alongside the usual lessons in reading, writing, and arithmetic. The children, naturally curious and lacking their parents' entrenched prejudices, absorbed these stories eagerly. Autumn deepened around Riverdale Valley, painting the mountains in ever more vibrant hues of russet and gold. Sarah's ankle healed completely, allowing her to resume her walks in the forest surrounding the settlement. She never ventured as far as Hawkstone Ridge again. That place held memories too intense to revisit casually. But she often found herself drawn to the bend in the Clearwater River where she and James had met Keme under the full moon. On one such afternoon, as Sarah sat on a sun-warmed rock beside the river, sketching the landscape in a small book her father had given her, she became aware of a presence nearby. Looking up, she was somehow unsurprised to find Kim standing at the forest's edge, as still and natural as the trees surrounding him. "You return often to this place," he observed, his deep voice carrying clearly across the short distance between them. Sarah closed her sketchbook, smiling in genuine pleasure at seeing him again. "It feels significant somehow," she admitted. "A boundary between two worlds." Kem approached, moving with his characteristic silent grace. He glanced at the sketchbook in her hands. "You make pictures of the river?" Sarah nodded, offering the book to him somewhat hesitantly. She had never shown her drawings to anyone outside her family before. "I try to capture what I see, though my skill doesn't do justice to the beauty." Kim accepted the sketchbook, turning pages with careful reverence. His fingers traced the lines of her drawings, the sweeping curves of the mountains, the delicate detail of wildflowers, the play of light on water. When he reached a page containing a rough portrait of himself, rendered from memory after their moonlit meeting, he paused. "You see clearly," he said finally, returning the book to her, "not just with eyes." Sarah felt a blush warm her cheeks at the simple compliment. "I heard what happened after we found the watch," she said, changing the subject. "Wilson has been banished from the settlement." Keme nodded. "Justice comes in many forms, his path now his own to walk." "Reed confessed everything," Sarah continued. "He seems genuinely remorseful. I believe he wants to make amends." "Telling truth begins healing," Keem agreed. "For him, for Mercer's spirit." for community wounded by lies. They fell into companionable silence, watching the river flow past, its surface glittering with afternoon sunlight. Sarah felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced since before her ordeal in the cave, a settling of disparate elements into harmonious balance. "I've been incorporating stories about your people into my lessons," she said eventually. "The children are fascinated. I thought, perhaps someday you might visit the school? Help me ensure I'm teaching with accuracy and respect." Surprise flickered briefly across Kemi's normally impassive features. "You would invite Shawnee to teach settler children." "I would invite you," Sarah clarified. "A man who has shown more wisdom and compassion than many who consider themselves civilized. The children should know there are good people on both sides of the boundaries we've drawn." Kemi considered this for a long moment, his dark eyes thoughtful. Such teaching, dangerous. Not all parents would welcome. "Some wouldn't," Sarah acknowledged, "but others would understand its importance. Change begins with small steps, with individual connections that challenge long-held assumptions." A smile, the first full smile she had seen from him, transformed Kem's face, softening its stern lines and illuminating his eyes. "You have courageous spirit, Sarah Mitchell, like hawk who flies against strong wind." From within his clothing, he withdrew a small object and held it out to her, a delicately carved wooden feather, so detailed Sarah could almost feel its softness. "Made this for you, to remember Mountain's lesson." Sarah accepted the carving, marveling at its craftsmanship. "It's beautiful, but I don't need reminders of what happened on the mountain. I carry those lessons with me always. Not to remember fear or danger," Keme explained, "to remember how faith carries across distances, how prayers find ears meant to hear them, how different paths can lead to same truth." Sarah's fingers closed around the wooden feather, its smooth surface warm from Keme's hand. In that moment, the distance between their worlds seemed both vast and non-existent. A paradox she was beginning to understand wasn't really a paradox at all, but a deeper truth about the interconnectedness of all things. "I should return to the settlement before they send out another search party," she said reluctantly, rising from her seat on the sun-warmed rock. Kema nodded in understanding. "We'll consider your invitation," he promised. "Perhaps when leaves fall completely, when forest stands more open, easier for settlement to see approach then." "I'll look forward to it," Sarah said, tucking the carved feather carefully into her pocket alongside her mother's locket. The two tokens, one of her heritage, one of her expanding understanding, seemed fitting companions. As Sarah walked back toward Riverdale Valley, she felt Keem's gaze following her, protective and respectful. She didn't look back, understanding instinctively that some partings were best left unmarked by backward glances. Their paths would cross again. The mountain had made that clear in ways that transcended ordinary certainty. The first snow of winter dusted Riverdale Valley a month later, transforming the landscape overnight into a glittering wonderland that delighted the settlement's children. Sarah stood at the schoolhouse door, watching her students arrive in twos and threes, their cheeks rosy with cold and excitement. Elizabeth Cooper, fully recovered from her summer fever, tugged at Sarah's sleeve. "Miss Mitchell, look, someone's coming!" Sarah followed the child's pointing finger to see a solitary figure approaching the schoolhouse. Even at a distance, she recognized Kem's distinctive silhouette. He had traded his buckskins for simple wool clothing, more typical of the frontier, though his beaded medicine pouch still hung at his neck. In his hands, he carried what appeared to be a bundle wrapped in tanned hide. A hush fell over the schoolyard as the children noticed the approaching stranger. Some of the older boys moved protectively in front of their younger siblings, reflecting attitudes absorbed from their parents. Sarah stepped forward deliberately, her smile of welcome clear for all to see. "Children," she announced, her teacher's voice carrying across the suddenly silent yard. "Today, we have a very special visitor. This is Keme, a Shawnee hunter and a friend who once saved my life. He has kindly agreed to share stories and knowledge with us." Elizabeth, always the boldest, despite her small stature, stepped forward. "Are you really a Shawnee?" she asked, her eyes wide with curiosity rather than fear. Keme crouched to the child's level, his movements slow and unthreatening. "Yes, little one, my people have lived in these mountains since before your great-great-grandparents were born." "Did you really save Miss Mitchell from drowning in a cave?" asked William Foster, Michael's eldest son. A ghost of a smile touched Kim's lips. "Mountain saved her," he corrected gently. "I was just Mountain's hands." Sarah watched as the children's natural curiosity gradually overcame their initial wariness. One by one they edged closer, drawn by Kemi's calm presence and the promise of new stories. By the time she called them inside for lessons, the atmosphere had transformed from tension to eager anticipation. Inside the schoolhouse, Kemi unwrapped his bundle to reveal an array of objects. A stone arrowhead, a section of birch bark with symbols etched into its surface, dried plants tied with sinew, and a small drum made of stretched hide over a wooden frame. Each item became the centerpiece of a story or lesson. How his people read the changing seasons, the medicinal properties of common plants, the meaning behind patterns carved into everyday objects. The children listened with rapt attention, their questions flowing more freely as the morning progressed. Sarah observed with quiet joy, recognizing that something momentous was occurring in her small schoolhouse. Boundaries were dissolving, understanding was taking root, and the seeds of change were being planted in fertile young minds. When midday arrived and the children departed for their homes and lunch, Sarah found herself alone with Kemi. The morning's success had left her exhilarated, but also keenly aware of the challenges that still lay ahead. "The parents will hear about this," she said, arranging the schoolroom after the morning's unusual activities. "Some will approve, others won't. Seeds planted today may take many seasons to grow," Kemi acknowledged. "But they are planted. That is beginning." Sarah paused in her work, turning to face him fully. "Will you come again? There's so much more the children could learn." Kemi considered the question with his customary thoroughness. "When time is right," he finally answered. "Need to let this first visit settle. Let children carry stories home. Let parents see no harm came." Wisdom in patience, Sarah thought, recognizing the strategy in his approach. Small steps, carefully placed, would ultimately carry them further than bold leaps that might provoke resistance. As Kemi gathered his teaching materials back into their hide wrapping, Sarah retrieved something from her desk. A book bound in simple leather, its pages filled with her sketches of local plants and animals, annotated in her neat handwriting. "For you," she said, offering it to him, "my own small contribution to understanding the plants and creatures we share, seen through my eyes, but perhaps useful to your people as well." Keme accepted the gift with evident appreciation, turning the pages with the same care he had shown during their meeting by the river. "Circle grows," he observed. "Your knowledge to my people, my knowledge to your children. This is how peace takes root." When he had gone, Sarah stood in the doorway of her schoolhouse, watching his figure diminish with distance. The carved feather he had given her rested in her pocket, a tangible reminder of all that had transpired since that rain-soaked day on Hawkstone Ridge. The mountain's lesson continued to unfold, revealing itself in unexpected ways through the changing seasons. Faith had guided her through darkness, courage had illuminated truth, and now understanding was building bridges where once only boundaries had existed. What had begun as a desperate prayer in a flooding cave had rippled outward, touching lives beyond her imagination. Sarah smiled as new snow began to fall, each unique crystalline flake connecting heaven and earth in its descent. The mountain was teaching still, for those with hearts open to learn. Spring came late to the Blue Ridge Mountains that year. Winters, grip lingering well into April with unexpected frosts and cold winds that delayed planting throughout Riverdale Valley. The hardship was not particular to their settlement. Travelers passing through brought stories of similar conditions stretching from Pennsylvania to Georgia, testing the resilience of frontier communities everywhere. For Sarah Mitchell, now in her third year as the settlement school teacher, the extended winter provided unexpected blessings despite its challenges. Attendance in her small schoolhouse remained steady as families kept their children closer to home rather than putting them to work in fields still too cold for planting. This continuity allowed her to develop a more ambitious curriculum than previous years, one that incorporated not only traditional reading, writing, and arithmetic, but also natural sciences, geography, and the history of the diverse peoples who had called these mountains home for generations. On this particular April morning, Sarah stood at the schoolhouse window, watching dark clouds gather over the distant peaks. The air held that peculiar stillness that often preceded a storm, a quality of suspended animation that made the ordinary world seem somehow more vivid and significant. Her students were absorbed in copying passages from Pilgrim's Progress, their quills scratching rhythmically against parchment in the otherwise quiet room. "Miss Mitchell?" Elizabeth Cooper's voice broke the silence. The girl had grown considerably since her illness nearly 2 years ago, though she remained small for her 11 years. "Is that Dr. Bennett riding toward the school?" Sarah turned her attention from the gathering storm to the approaching horseman. Dr. Joseph Bennett indeed rode toward them at a pace that suggested urgency without panic. In the close-knit community of Riverdale Valley, unexpected visitors during school hours usually signaled some manner of emergency. "Continue with your copying," Sarah instructed her students as she moved toward the door. "I'll speak with the doctor outside." She met Joseph Bennett on the schoolhouse steps, noting the grave concern etched into his features. Though only in his 50s, recent years had aged him considerably. The loss of his friend Jacob Mercer and the subsequent revelation of Garrett Wilson's crimes, leaving lasting marks on his once jovial countenance. "Joseph," she greeted him, "is something wrong?" The doctor dismounted with the careful movements of a man who spent more time tending patients than riding horseback. "No immediate emergency," he assured her, "but news that couldn't wait. The council received word this morning from Fort Chester. There's been an incident." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the spring air. Fort Chester lay 40 miles west, the nearest military outpost in a territory still largely defined by uneasy relations between settlers and indigenous peoples. What kind of incident? A hunting party from one of the eastern Cherokee villages encountered trappers from Fort Chester on disputed land, Bennett explained, his voice low to prevent the information from reaching curious young ears inside the schoolhouse. Words were exchanged, then bullets. 2 Cherokee hunters and 1 settler were killed. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, absorbing the implications. "And the council fears repercussions might reach us here." Bennett nodded. "Relations with the Shawnee bands nearby have been peaceful since the Wilson affair, but tensions like these have a way of spreading. Your father asked me to bring you home after school concludes today. The council is gathering all families closer to the settlement center until we know more." A gust of wind swept across the schoolyard, carrying the scent of imminent rain. "I understand," Sarah said, though her thoughts immediately went to Keme, wondering if he was already aware of these developments and what they might mean for the tentative bridge building that had occurred over the past year and a half. "There's more," Bennett added, his expression softening with sympathy. Riders were sent to outlying homesteads this morning with the warning: the Cooper farm was found abandoned. Abandoned? Sarah repeated, her concern immediately focusing on her former student's family. Elizabeth's parents would never leave without warning. They're a half-day's ride at most from the settlement. That's what troubles the council as well, Bennett confirmed. No signs of violence were found, but their livestock had been set loose, and it appeared they left in haste. Sarah's gaze turned unconsciously toward the mountains where dark clouds now obscured the highest peaks. Something about this situation felt wrong, not simply concerning, but fundamentally misaligned with her understanding of both her neighbors and the fragile peace that had held in their region. I'll dismiss the children early today, she decided. Those who live within the settlement can walk home immediately. For the others, I'll await their parents' arrival. Bennett nodded approval. Your father would appreciate your caution, Sarah. These may prove to be nothing but ripples from a distant stone, but until we're certain, better to be prudent, she finished for him. Please tell Father I'll be home before the storm breaks. After Bennett departed, Sarah returned to the schoolroom with a composed expression that betrayed none of her inner disquiet. She announced an early dismissal due to the approaching weather, assigning additional reading to compensate for the shortened day. Within half an hour, most of the children had been collected by parents who themselves carried news of the council's warning, their expressions varying from mild concern to barely concealed fear. Only Elizabeth remained, sitting quietly at her desk with the patient resignation of a child accustomed to being the last collected. Her parents' farm lay furthest from the settlement, and her father, Thomas Cooper, often lost track of time when absorbed in his fieldwork. I'm sure your mother will arrive soon, Sarah assured her, though the words felt hollow given what she had learned from Dr. Bennett. Elizabeth nodded, returning to her book without complaint. The girl had matured remarkably since her illness, developing a thoughtful, observant nature that sometimes made her seem older than her years. The clouds are moving faster now, she noted, glancing toward the window. Father says that means a strong storm. Sarah followed her gaze, noting the darkening sky and the way tree branches had begun to sway with increasing vigor. A sense of unease settled deeper into her consciousness. Martha Cooper was a prudent woman who had never before failed to collect. Her daughter, particularly with weather threatening. Another half hour passed with no sign of Elizabeth's parents. The first heavy raindrops began to strike the schoolhouse roof, the sporadic tapping quickly accelerating into a steady drumming that signaled the storm's arrival in earnest. We should wait no longer, Sarah decided, gathering her shawl and the extra cloak she kept at the school for emergencies. You'll stay with my family tonight, Elizabeth. Tomorrow we can determine why your parents were delayed. She chose not to share Bennett's troubling news about the abandoned Cooper homestead, seeing no benefit in frightening the child unnecessarily. Instead, she helped Elizabeth into the spare cloak, its generous proportions enveloping the girl's small frame completely. We'll move quickly but carefully, Sarah instructed, securing her own shawl against the increasing wind. Stay close to me. They stepped out into the storm, the rain immediately soaking through Sarah's shawl despite its wool construction. The settlement center lay only a quarter-mile from the schoolhouse, but the deteriorating conditions transformed the familiar path into a challenging journey. Wind-driven rain reduced visibility to mere yards, while the ground beneath their feet rapidly softened into treacherous mud. Keep hold of my hand, Sarah called over the storm's growing roar. Elizabeth's fingers tightened around hers, the child's trust a responsibility Sarah felt with renewed intensity. They had covered perhaps half the distance to the Mitchell home, when Sarah sensed, rather than saw, movement at the forest's edge, approximately 30 yards to their right. She paused, squinting through the curtain of rain, uncertain whether her eyes were deceiving her. Miss Mitchell, Elizabeth questioned, following her gaze. The movement came again, definitely human, a figure partially concealed by the tree line, gesturing toward them with deliberate motions. Sarah's initial apprehension gave way to recognition as the figure emerged slightly from the forest's shelter, revealing distinctive beaded decorations that could belong to only one person. "Keme," she whispered, surprise mingling with relief. At the sight of the Shawnee hunter, his gestures became more urgent, clearly beckoning them toward the forest rather than the settlement center. Sarah hesitated, torn between the safety of her family's home and her implicit trust in the man who had once saved her life. Something in his posture communicated urgency that transcended the storm's natural threat. "Who is that man?" Elizabeth asked, her voice carrying a trace of the wariness she had absorbed from the settlement's collective caution regarding Indians. "A friend," Sarah replied with conviction. "Someone I trust completely." She made her decision, adjusting their course toward the forest's edge. "Come, Elizabeth, I believe he has important reasons for calling us." The girl followed without protest, though Sarah felt her grip tighten further. They struggled through, deepening mud toward the tree line where Keme waited, his normally impassive features bearing an unusual tension that confirmed Sarah's instinctive response to his summons. "Not safe in settlement," he stated, without preamble once they reached the relative shelter of the forest canopy. "Need to come now." "What's happened?" Sarah asked, automatically placing a protective arm around Elizabeth's shoulders. Keem's gaze softened momentarily as it fell on the child, recognition flickering in his dark eyes. "Cooper child," he observed. "Good. Already found you." Elizabeth stared up at him with undisguised curiosity, despite the alarming circumstances. "Do you know where my parents are?" she asked directly. "Safe," Keem assured her. "With my people, sent me to find you." He returned his attention to Sarah. Wilson returned, not alone. Men from Fort Chester with him, carrying anger about Cherokee incident. Blame all native peoples. Plan attack on settlement and Shawnee camps both. Sarah's blood ran cold, despite the exertion of their rushed journey. "Wilson is back, but he was banished. Men like Wilson make own rules," Keem interrupted, an unusual urgency breaking through his typically measured speech. "Found allies in Fort who believe his lies about Shawnee threatening settlers, use Cherokee incident as excuse to gather fighters." "We need to warn the settlement," Sarah insisted, already turning back toward Riverdale Valley. Gemma gently caught her arm. Too late. Men already positioned around settlement, using storm as cover. His expression conveyed genuine regret. "Your father and others safe for now. Wilson wants council members as hostages to force demands, not planning immediate harm to settlers." "What demands?" Sarah asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. "Access to all hunting grounds, removal of remaining Shawnee bands." Kim's jaw tightened. "Return to old ways of taking what they want through force." The magnitude of the crisis struck Sarah with physical impact. Wilson had returned not simply for revenge against those who had exposed his crimes, but to systematically destroy the fragile peace that had begun, to take root between the cultures sharing these mountains. "What can we do?" she asked, instinctively deferring to Kame's greater knowledge of the dangerous terrain they now navigated, not just the physical landscape, but the perilous territory of cultural conflict. Cooper family saw Wilson's men gathering. "Yesterday," Keme explained, "recognized danger, remembered connection to Shawnee through you." His gaze held a hint of approval. Brave choice to seek help from those many settlers still fear. "My father spoke with your people?" Elizabeth interjected, her young mind quickly connecting the fragments of information. Keme nodded. "Came to trading place we established after winter, asked for sanctuary, warning of what they had seen, elders granted protection. His expression grew more somber. Also sent messengers to other Shawnee bands and to Cherokee allies. Warriors will come, but not for 3 days at least. 3 days, Sarah repeated, her teacher's mind automatically calculating the implications. By then, Wilson could have fortified the settlement, using the residents as shields against any attempt to dislodge him. Yes, Kim confirmed grimly, unless we find different path. The rain continued unabated around them, though the forest canopy provided some shelter. From its full force, Sarah became acutely aware of Elizabeth shivering beside her, the child's soaked clothing providing little protection against the spring chill. "We need to get Elizabeth somewhere warm and dry," she said decisively. "Then we can discuss our next steps." Kamei immediately removed the hide covering he wore over his shoulders, wrapping it around the girl with gentle efficiency. "Shawnee camp half-day's walk," he said. "Too far in storm with child." He seemed to reach a decision after brief contemplation. No closer shelter. Hunter's cabin used in winter. No one there now. Sarah recognized his reference to the same cabin where they had taken refuge during her rescue nearly 2 years earlier. "Is it safe? Wilson's men won't look there?" "Off known paths," Kemi assured her. "And storm covers tracks. Best choice until weather clears." With no better alternative apparent, Sarah nodded agreement. "Lead the way." Their journey through the storm-lashed forest tested even Keem's considerable wilderness skills. What would have been a challenging 2-hour walk, in fair conditions stretched into a grueling 4-hour ordeal as they navigated slippery slopes, rain-swollen streams, and wind-toppled trees. Kemi carried Elizabeth for the most difficult stretches, the girl's initial wariness giving way to exhausted acceptance of his assistance. Twilight was deepening into full darkness when they finally reached the small log cabin nestled in a protected hollow. The structure appeared much as Sarah remembered it, sturdy if humble, its single room offering basic shelter that now seemed luxurious after their arduous journey. "Wait here," Kemi instructed, setting Elizabeth gently on her feet beside Sarah before approaching the cabin with cautious vigilance. He circled the structure completely, examining its immediate surroundings before finally approaching the door. Directly, only after a thorough inspection of the interior did he motion them forward. "Empty for many weeks," he confirmed, "but dry wood inside can make fire." The interior was cold but mercifully dry. True to the mountain lore Kemi had described during their previous visit, the cabin's modest supplies had been maintained. Firewood stacked neatly beside the stone hearth, dried foodstuffs stored in sealed containers on shelves, even clean hides folded for use as bedding. Sarah immediately set about removing Elizabeth's wet clothing, while Kem expertly built a fire in the hearth. Within minutes, warmth began to radiate through the small space. Elizabeth sat wrapped in a deerskin before the growing flames, her damp hair forming a dark halo around her pale face. "Are we going to rescue everyone?" she asked, with the direct simplicity of childhood, her question cutting through the adult's careful evasions. Sarah exchanged a glance with Kamei before sitting beside the girl. "We're going to try," she said honestly. "But first, we need to understand exactly what's happening and make a careful plan." "Wilson has guns," Elizabeth observed soberly. "My father said he saw them when the men were gathering near our farm. Long rifles and pistols, too." Kemi nodded, respect evident in his expression at the child's clear-eyed assessment. "Yes, Wilson and Fort Chester men well armed. Makes direct confrontation unwise." "We need to think differently," Sarah agreed. She spread her own sodden dress near the fire before wrapping another hide around her shoulders. The immediate crisis of cold and wet addressed, her mind turned to the larger threat facing both her community and Kem's people. Wilson expects Shawnee attack when word of his actions reaches other bands. she reasoned aloud. He's probably told the settlers he's protecting them from an imminent threat, keeping any knowledge of the Cherokee incident carefully controlled. Yes, Kimi confirmed. Creates fear, makes settlers accept his leadership even if uncomfortable with his methods. So he's positioned himself as their protector against a Shawnee threat that doesn't actually exist, Sarah continued, the pieces aligning in her mind. Meanwhile, when Shawnee warriors do eventually arrive in response to his aggression, their appearance will seem to confirm his warnings. Perfect trap, Keem agreed grimly. Creates war neither side truly wants. Elizabeth had been following, their exchange with intense concentration. But if my parents went to the Shawnee for help and Miss Mitchell is friends with Kame, doesn't that show not all Shawnee are dangerous? Sarah smiled despite the gravity of their situation, recognizing the simple wisdom in the child's observation. That's exactly right, Elizabeth. The truth is our strongest weapon against Wilson's lies. We just need to find a way to make that truth known before violence erupts. The trio lapsed into thoughtful silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the continued drumming of rain on the cabin's roof. Outside, full night had fallen, the storm showing no signs of abating. Any further action would need to wait for morning at minimum. Should rest now, Kame eventually advised. Tomorrow will require clear minds. Sarah nodded agreement, helping. Elizabeth, create a comfortable sleeping place near the hearth where the fire's warmth would keep her comfortable through the night. The girl fell asleep almost immediately, the day's extraordinary events and physical exertion finally overwhelming her young body's resources. With Elizabeth sleeping peacefully, Sarah joined Kime near the cabin's single window, where he stood, gazing out into the storm-shrouded night. "Do you think my family is truly safe?" she asked quietly, the question she had been holding back while the child was awake, finally finding voice. Kame's expression remained stoic, but his eyes conveyed understanding of her concern. Wilson needs settlements cooperation. Harm to respected family like Mitchell's would turn many against him. Your father too valuable as hostage to risk injury. The assessment was coldly logical, but brought Sarah little comfort. And your people? The Shawnee camp where the Coopers sought refuge? Hidden in high valleys, Keme replied. Places settlers rarely travel. Secure for now. Sarah nodded, forcing herself to focus on immediate challenges rather than allowing worry to consume her strength. Wilson doesn't know that we're aware of his plans, she observed. That gives us some advantage. Small advantage, Kime cautioned. But yes, surprise can balance scales against greater numbers. They spoke further into the night, evaluating options and discarding those too dangerous or unlikely to succeed. The storm gradually diminished to a steady rainfall, less violent but persistent enough to ensure they remained isolated in their temporary refuge. Sarah eventually settled onto a pallet of hides near Elizabeth, bone-tired but mind still racing with contingencies and possibilities. She watched as Kemi performed what seemed to be a brief ritual before the fire, touching his medicine pouch, murmuring words too quiet to distinguish, passing his hand through the flames in a quick, deliberate motion. "You seek guidance," she observed softly. Keme turned toward her, seemingly unsurprised by her awareness. "As you do in your way," he replied. Different words, same hope. Sarah touched the locket that still hung around her neck after all this time. "Faith has guided us before." "Faith provides light," Kim agreed, "but feet must still walk the path revealed." He settled on his own sleeping pallet, positioned near the door as if even in rest he remained vigilant. Sleep now. Path becomes clearer with morning light. Despite her exhaustion, Sarah found sleep elusive. Her thoughts returned repeatedly to her family, to the settlement under Wilson's control, to the innocent people on both sides who might soon suffer for one man's hatred and ambition. Eventually, physical fatigue overcame mental agitation, and she drifted into uneasy slumber. She awakened to grey dawn light filtering through the cabin's small window and the unexpected sound of voices outside. Keme was already alert, positioned, beside the door with a knife drawn, his posture tense but controlled. Elizabeth still slept, oblivious to the potential danger. Tracks leading this way, clear as day now that the rain's stopped, a male voice was saying, its familiar cadence causing Sarah to freeze in recognition. Could be anyone, another voice responded. Hunters, trappers, no reason to think. I know my sister's footprints, the first voice insisted, and the child's beside hers. They came this way during the storm, James. I'm certain of it. Relief flooded through Sarah as she identified the speaker. Ezra, she whispered to Keem. My brother. The tension in Keme's posture eased slightly. Though he maintained his defensive position, others with him. Sarah moved carefully to the window, peering out to assess the situation. Just my older brother James, it seems. They must have slipped away from the settlement. After a moment's consideration, Keme nodded. Open door slowly, he advised, shifting to a less threatening stance, though he kept his knife at hand. Sarah unbarred the cabin door and pulled it open, immediately catching sight of her brothers standing at the edge of the small clearing. Their expressions transformed from determined focus to stark relief at the sight of her. Sarah! Ezra rushed forward, gathering her in a fierce embrace. Thank God you're safe. When you didn't return from the school yesterday, I'm fine, she assured him, returning his embrace before turning to include James as well. Elizabeth is here too, sleeping still. But how did you get away from the settlement? We heard Wilson has everyone contained. The brothers exchanged grim looks. Wilson arrived with about 15 men from Fort Chester yesterday, James explained. They've positioned themselves throughout the settlement, controlling movement and gathering weapons. Father and the other council members are being held in the meeting house. But they didn't account for the old tunnel, Ezra added with a hint of satisfaction, the one beneath the root cellar that grandfather dug during the French and Indian War. Sarah had almost forgotten the narrow escape passage that extended from beneath their family home to a concealed exit nearly a quarter-mile outside the settlement proper. It had been created generations earlier and rarely used since. Its existence, known only to the Mitchell family and their closest confidants. We slipped out during the night shift change, James continued. Mother refused to leave Father, but insisted we find you. We tracked your route from the schoolhouse once the rain stopped. He paused then, noticing Keme fully for the first time. His hand moved instinctively toward his belt knife before recognition dawned. You're the Shawnee hunter, the one who saved Sarah in the cave. Keme inclined his head slightly. The mountain saved her. I merely listened. The familiar phrase brought an unexpected smile to Sarah's lips, despite the dire circumstances. Keme has been helping me understand what's happening, she explained. Wilson is using the settlement as a base for broader aggression against the Shawnee. He's trying to provoke a conflict that would drive them from their remaining hunting grounds. Ezra's expression darkened. That matches what we've overheard. He's been telling everyone that Shawnee warriors murdered a settler family west of here and that an attack on Riverdale is imminent. Most people don't believe him entirely, but they're scared enough to accept his protection for now. The Coopers weren't murdered. Elizabeth's small voice came from the cabin doorway, where she stood wrapped in a deerskin, her hair tousled from sleep. They went to the Shawnee for help when they saw bad men with guns. James stared at the child in confusion. Your parents are alive, Elizabeth? Where are they? At a Shawnee camp in the high valleys, Sarah explained quickly. They recognized Wilson and sought sanctuary with Kem's people, warning them of his return. The implications of this revelation were immediately apparent to both brothers. If the settlers knew the Coopers had voluntarily sought Shawnee protection rather than being harmed by them, James began. It would undermine Wilson's entire narrative, Sarah finished. But how do we get that truth to the settlement with Wilson and his men controlling all movement and communication? The 5 of them, 3 Mitchells, 1 Cooper, and 1 Shawnee, gathered inside the cabin as morning strengthened around them, pooling their knowledge and perspectives in search of a strategy that might prevent the bloodshed Wilson seemed determined to provoke. Wilson expects an eventual attack from the Shawnee, James reasoned, which is why he's fortifying the settlement. But what he doesn't anticipate is intervention from within. The tunnel, Ezra suggested. We could bring a small group of trusted settlers out, then take them to meet the Coopers. Once they see the truth with their own eyes, they could help convince others. Keme had listened to their discussion with thoughtful attention. Now he spoke, his deep voice carrying the weight of careful consideration. Dangerous for many to travel to Shawnee camp. Wilson's men patrol forests. Better to bring Cooper family closer, to place settlers know and trust. The old chapel, Sarah suggested immediately. It's only a mile beyond the settlement boundary, but hidden enough that Wilson's men are unlikely to have discovered it. The abandoned chapel had been Riverdale Valley's first meeting place before the current settlement had been established. Built of stone and nestled in a small hollow, it had fallen into disuse, but remained structurally sound, its existence fading from common knowledge as years passed. I could guide Cooper family there, Kemi offered. 2 days' journey from Shawnee camp if we travel quickly. Meanwhile, we can spread word through the tunnel to those settlers most likely to stand against Wilson once they know the truth, James added. Dr. Bennett, Reverend Cooper, the Fosters, they've all expressed private doubts about Wilson's claims. Elizabeth, who had been following their conversation with intense focus, suddenly spoke up. What about me? I want to help too. The adults exchanged glances, Sarah's protective instinct warring with her recognition of the child's potential role. Elizabeth, knowing her parents are safe rather than harmed by the Shawnee, would be powerful testimony, she acknowledged reluctantly. Child should return to settlement, Kemi stated firmly. Safer there than journeying through forest to chapel. After further discussion, a plan gradually crystallized. Keme would return to the Shawnee camp and guide the Coopers to the old chapel, arriving in 4 days' time. Meanwhile, James and Ezra would return through the tunnel to selectively inform trusted settlers about Wilson's deception and Elizabeth's safety, gathering support for a coordinated resistance from within. And I'll accompany Elizabeth back to the settlement openly, Sarah decided. Wilson won't harm the child, and my return provides an opportunity to assess the situation directly. Her brothers protested this last element vigorously, arguing that Wilson's personal animosity toward her made her return too dangerous, but Sarah remained adamant. He expects me to be hiding in fear, she pointed out. My calm return with Elizabeth will confuse him, make him wonder what else he might have misunderstood. Besides, I need to know our parents are truly unharmed. Eventually, the brothers reluctantly conceded to her logic. Final plans were made, contingencies discussed, and tasks assigned with the gravity appropriate to their perilous undertaking. As they prepared to separate, each to their respective roles in the drama unfolding around them, Sarah found a moment alone with Keme near the cabin door. The risks you're taking for our settlement, she began, struggling to articulate the depth of her gratitude and concern. Your people might question your involvement in settler problems. Keme's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Some will question, he acknowledged, But elders understand that peace requires effort from both sides. Mountain has room for all who respect its ways. Sarah touched the carved feather she still carried in her pocket alongside her mother's locket. "Faith guides through darkness," she murmured, "but feet must still walk the path revealed." A rare smile touched Kem's lips as she echoed his words from the previous night. "Walk with courage, Sarah Mitchell. We meet again at Old Chapel in 4 days." With those words, they parted, Sarah and Elizabeth accompanied by James back toward Riverdale Valley, Ezra taking a different route to remain undetected until nightfall when he would use the tunnel, and Keem disappearing into the forest with the silent efficiency that still amazed her even after all they had shared. As Sarah walked beside Elizabeth, the child's hand trustingly in hers, she felt the weight of responsibility balanced by the lightness of hope. The mountain had taught her many lessons since that rain-soaked day when she had nearly lost her life in a flooded cave. Now it offered perhaps its most important teaching, that truth, compassionately revealed, held power greater than any weapon Wilson might wield. The path before them remained fraught with danger, the outcome uncertain, but Sarah moved forward with the quiet confidence of one who had learned to hear guidance in unexpected voices, to recognize wisdom in unfamiliar forms, and to trust that, even in the darkest circumstances, light eventually finds its way through. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.